Hello, and welcome to Chapter 3 of your Art Appreciation course. This is Themes in Art. There are many ways to study art. One is chronologically, so in order of history, and we will be studying chronologically in the second half of the session. The advantages to studying chronologically is that you get to see art in a cultural context, but a drawback is that you might lose sight of characteristics of art from different eras and places that they may have in common. Art, for example, from thousands of years apart can have the same theme. So a theme is like a thread running throughout history. And art can have many different themes, so you might look at an artwork and say, oh, that looks like looking inward, but it also can have another theme. It's simply a framework for discussing art, and there's lots of themes that aren't necessarily discussed in this chapter, so keep that in mind. Our first thing that we're going to talk about is visual delight and the arts of daily life. So this artwork has to do with objects that could be used in everyday life, but that have been made aesthetically pleasing and artistic. This is Feather Basket from the Pomo culture from 1877. In this culture, the art of basketry was highly valued. And this particular basket is based around the legend of the sun's journey as a result of the Pomo ancestor who stole the sun from God and hung it in a basket to light earth. To create these baskets, there's a ritual act that is made to gather materials such as root, bark, and wood. Here we can see an alternating pattern of lights and darks within the basket, and there's also feathers and beads that have been woven in. There are small imperfections in the basket that you have to look pretty closely to see. And those are put there on purpose as a way for the spirit, the good spirit, to get in and the bad spirit to get out. And they're called Tao. These are usually gifts for honored people, and they're destroyed when those people have died. Here we have a living room with a wall painting by Selina Mosambaka from South Africa. In this culture, the women's domain is the homestead. The walls here have been woven of twigs and sticks with a thatched roof, and the walls were built up with mud. The walls have been decorated with murals. And in this case, the mural was painted to prepare for a wedding. Here we can see bold forms, clean colors, and black outlines around the shapes. This is a common style found in this culture, and it would have been part of daily life. The second thing that we're going to talk about is the sacred realm. Each society has formed their own idea of what the sacred realm entails, and art has played an important role in helping visualize the sacred throughout history. The first work that we're going to look at is Sainte-Chapelle in Paris from 1243. Sainte-Chapelle was built by King Louis IX to house relics. You can see by looking at it, there's a very vertical space. It's filled with beautiful stained glass windows that create kind of an otherworldly effect when the light shines through, and you can see the colors kind of playing on the floor here. It's an intimate space, so it's a smaller cathedral, and it was built really for only the king and his court. Another religious structure is the Great Mosque in Spain from 786. This is the largest prayer hall in Western Islam, and it's created in a hypostyle hall where we have this forest of columns. You can see the columns create a separation of this very large space. And really the columns are there to create kind of individual spaces for worship. But with the light coming in, you can see how there's a complex play of light and shadow on the floor. So it's kind of similar to how the stained glass was working in Sainte-Chapelle. So it kind of creates this otherworldly effect. And in this particular structure, and as well as other Islamic structures, you're not going to see religious imagery including people. That was considered false idolatry. Whereas in Chantepel, you'll see that the stained glass windows would have had images of people. So it's a little bit, that's a difference between the two. But a similarity is that the everyday world is shut out in both of them. They both create this otherworldly effect. And there's a heightened sense of mystery and wonder whenever you enter the space. So it's kind of like you're leaving the everyday world when you enter these spaces and are able to focus more on the spiritual realm. So this is Ratna Somabha from the 13th century in Tibet. It's a Buddhist image, and this is one of 5 transcendent Buddhas in the meditation pose that we're seeing. In the Buddha's right hand, you can see that he has a gesture of blessing, and in the left hand, you see a gesture of meditation. Surrounding the Buddha is bodhisattvas, which we can see here. You can see that they have halos. And these particular figures, the bodhisattvas, are enlightened beings who defer their ultimate goal of release in order to help others. So in Buddhism, your goal is to become enlightened, and that enlightenment then frees you from the cycle of reincarnation. And bodhisattvas are there to help guide people to their destination of being enlightened. So they're delaying their own release in order to help others. You'll notice that some of the figures appear smaller. So like down here we see smaller figures, then we have kind of these medium figures, and then of course the largest figure is Buddha. This type of use of scale to relay importance is called hierarchical scale. So again, that means the smaller something is, the less important it will be, whereas the larger it is, the more important it will be. And this type of hierarchical scale can be seen in a lot of different religious artwork. As in this one, this is called Madonna Enthroned by Cimabue from 1280 to 90. And we're looking at an image here of Mary with her son in the center. So Christ is seated on Mary's lap. Her hand is in a gesture kind of pointing at Christ. Surrounding the figures of Mary and Jesus, you can see these angels. Notice how they have halos as well. Angels are heavenly beings that are sent to help humankind on the quest to paradise. So in a way, you can see similarities between the angels and the bodhisattvas. You'll notice how they wear halos to indicate their holiness, just like the bodhisattvas do. We also have hierarchical scale, with the angels being smaller than Mary and Christ, as well as this frontal pose of Mary, where we get to see, you know, she's facing front, as are all the figures. So you might notice that there's some similarities between these two. For one thing, is that they were created around the same time period, but they were 4,000 miles apart. Both, you're going to see important holy figures, and then you're also going to see them surrounded by kind of more active figures that are doing a little bit more activity. The next theme that we're going to talk about is politics and the social order. So the questions of how to form society is often reflected in the arts. This is an image of the Great Pyramids from Egypt from 2500 BCE. In the Egyptian culture from this time period, this is a society in which the earthly order and the cosmic order were closely linked and were mutually dependent. So in order for you to have a successful afterlife, your life on earth had to kind of be for preparing for that afterlife. The pharaoh or king was seen as a junior god, and in order to maintain the order of the universe, you really had to please the pharaoh. So they really had unlimited power over the country, which really was seen as to belong to him. And when the pharaoh died, it was thought that they became fully divine, so it became a full god. And in order to prepare for that life as a god, they needed to prepare or have preparations for that journey to begin during life. The pyramids themselves that we're looking at, the three large ones, here, here, and here, these were actually tombs for Menkaure, Khafre, and Khufu. The scale is just awe-inspiring, with being 480 feet high as well as 13 acres long. It's created from 2 million blocks of stone, and each stone was over 2 tons each. So it was a massive effort to build these pyramids. And that tells you just how revered and important the pharaohs were. So surrounding the pyramids, there would have been statues that represent the pharaoh and really represent a place for the pharaoh's spirit to reside after death. So statues of leaders are common throughout history. This is the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius from Rome from 164 to 166. So in it, we're seeing equestrian statue, which means we're seeing a leader on the back of a horse. And you'll notice, you might notice that there's a little bit of a scale exaggeration here with Marcus Aurelius. If you took him off his horse and stood him up, he would be very, very tall compared to the horse. So there's this effort to exaggerate his power by making it appear like he's more powerful than the horse that he's sitting on. So he's larger than the horse. So this type of kind of propagandistic imagery was common in the Roman culture. Marcus Aurelius wanted to be seen as a philosopher king, so someone who was, intellectual as well as powerful. Here he's raising his arm in this gesture of an orator, so getting ready to make a speech of some sort. Also, originally there was a fallen enemy below the horse here that he would have been stepping on. So gives an idea again of his power over the enemy, his intellectual side, as well as his ability to rule. This is Liberty Leading the People by Delacroix from 1830 in France. So during this time period, there was a revolution against the monarchy, and this particular artist supported this revolution that happened. And what we're seeing here is really an idealized view of an insurrection as well as hopes for the future. So we can see in the foreground, we have the fallen enemy. We have Liberty, who's leading the pack of rebels from behind in this very powerful, forward-moving gesture. And it's really glorifying violence. And during the time period, it was actually too controversial to be shown. On the opposite side, we have Guernica by Pablo Picasso from 1937, in which he's condemning violence. So this is depicting the events of the Spanish Civil War. So another kind of civil war. And during this time period, the Germans actually bombed the village of Guernica as a test for an air raid. And the town was just defenseless, and it was basically a massacre. This was created within a month of the disaster. Now, Picasso wasn't in Spain at the time, but he learned about this event through newspapers, and you can see that news-like quality reflected in what appears to be almost like newsprint in some of the areas, as well as the black and white color scheme. So it's meant to feel very much like a newspaper. Very stark and powerful imagery where we have, the figures in white, the background in black, so they really stand out. You'll notice how the figures, their faces, they're just wailing. Like you can see here, the mother with her dead child, her head up, and she's just in absolute misery. You can see fallen people here. Even the horse is screaming. So the entire image is full of this just kind of anguish and pain that's been represented. So Guernica could also be seen as fitting into this next theme, which is stories and histories. And artists often use cultural stories for their subjects. This is St. Francis giving his mantle to a poor man and the vision of the heavenly city by Sasetta from 1437. In Europe in the 15th century, we have a Christian society, and the lives of saints were often portrayed. This particular saint, St. Francis, actually announced his inheritance of the life of the poor, so kind of denounced any riches. And he founded a religious community of monks. And this particular image is actually illustrating two different episodes from his life. On the left, you can see the wealthy Francis with the horse here. He's giving his cloak to a poor man. And then on the right side, you can see through the house, through the wall here, where we're seeing Francis getting a vision from the angel of the city of God, which appears up above. So the hand of the angel here, you can see, is leading the eye up to the vision of the heavenly city. In this image, we're seeing an image from India from 1650. And it's illustrating a scene from Ramayana, the story of Rama, in which Rama is the hero. He's the prince and in the incarnation of Vishnu, who is a god. He's the heir to the throne, who was exiled because of a jealous intrigue. His wife Sita was then carried off by a demon. Chronicles search for Sita and rightful possession of the ruler. So in this image, we're seeing Rama battle Ravana for Sita's release. And you can see many different scenes kind of going on at once within this image, just like we saw with the last image. You can also see that same technique where the wall is removed and you can see inside the structure. This is Altar to Chases High School by Boltanensky from 1987. In this image, the artist is drawing on the memories of the Holocaust by portraying photos of students at a Jewish high school from 1931. He's enlarged and retouched these blurry photographs of the Jewish students. The lights that are kind of kind of in front of and up above these images kind of portray halos almost as they're shining on the images of the students. The stacked boxes here are meant to represent kind of holding almost like an urn, like they're holding ashes, or they could be holding possessions or documents. There's no real identity to these figures, just as many of the people in the Holocaust kind of lost their identity as they were killed during the Holocaust. The next theme we're going to talk about is looking outward, the here and now. So sometimes art is just about kind of looking around and recording what's going on for future generations. This is a model depicting the counting of livestock in Egypt from 2134 BCE. Sorry, there should be a BCE there. So this is basically just a recording of something that happened during daily life, where we have all the cattle that are being herded here, and you can see people up here, other people kind of herding the cattle down below. And this was a way of kind of counting the livestock and taking measure of their possessions. And these types of imagery, this type of sculpture was important because it allowed for the owner of the tomb, which was Mekter, in the afterlife, he would have been able to have his cattle Whereas if he didn't have this depiction, those cattle wouldn't be there in the afterlife. This is another image that's depicting an everyday activity. This is court ladies preparing newly woven silk from 1082. And this scene is from a longhand scroll, so there's multiple scenes that are depicted. In this particular scene, we're seeing 4 ladies who are elegantly dressed stretch the fabric. One irons the fabric with coal, as you can see right here in the center. And you can also see a child who's kind of paying attention and kind of looking in underneath the fabric and kind of plays. So this is depicting what the ladies of the imperial court would have done during this time period. This is Bathers at Arsernay by Seurat from 1883. He was a post-impressionist painter who oftentimes painted the middle class who were kind of new and emerging during this time period. In this particular image, we're seeing the leisure time of the middle class. You'll notice that each person is kind of isolated. There's not really 2 people that are touching. They're all kind of in their own little world. In the background, you can see that there's factories, and the factories are there as a reminder of why there is a middle class now, as people moved from farms into more urban areas and got factory jobs. So it's really about the industrialization of Europe that was going on during this time period. This is Windward by Robert Rauschenberg from 1963. And here he's talking about the impact of daily life within this image, and kind of you can see how it kind of outgrows the image as things kind of get cut off. There are certain things that are recognizable here. You can see the bald eagle, Statue of Liberty, those kind of represent America. Then you can see these oranges with the sun-kissed right here. The Sistine Chapel ceiling by Michelangelo there, another image of the Statue of Liberty here. So there's a lot of visual imagery that you may recognize, and these are all from different sources that occur kind of in everyday life, right? So you might see an image of the Statue of Liberty in a newspaper. You might see those oranges in an advertisement. And Rauschenberg was known for taking imagery that you would see in everyday life and using it in his artwork to, in a way, kind of capture the here and now, what was going on around him during his time period. The next theme we're going to talk about is looking inward, the human experience. So all humans share certain experiences, such as birth, growing, death, emotions, and artwork can often deal with these experiences. This is Talking Skull by Meta Warnick from 1937. In it, she's talking about the desire to talk to someone dead. So you can see there's a skull here, almost as if the figure is looking into the grave of this deceased person. And you can see the expression on the face is just very longing, longing to have this connection to somebody who has passed. So there is a universal message here about wanting to kind of cross that boundary, between life and death. But it's also about the African American experience and the breach in contact with ancestors that was caused by slavery. So this is a very traditional technique that the artist has mastered, but it's done in a subject that is meant to reach African Americans. This is Hood's Red Rider by Sikander from 1997. In this one, the artist is attempting to express their own personal experiences, but they do take the form of traditional painting, which was the miniature in Pakistan, and it uses it in a more modern way. They're repeating the figure in works, so you can see the figure several times, here, here, here. The female wears a conservative head covering, which you would have seen in the Islamic culture. And there's also a reference to the Hindu goddess Diva, as well as a self-portrait. In Woman Holding a Balance by Vermeer from 1664, there is a sense of stillness, and you have to look deeper and kind of symbolically as to, you know, how this is representative of the human spirit or the human experience. So you can see right in the center of the composition, the woman is holding a scale. Surrounding her, you can see jewelry. You can see this painting in the background, which is of the Last Judgment. And what we talked about with the Vanitas paintings in chapter 1 is kind of represented here with that painting. So you have the idea that Christ is judging who's going to heaven, who's going to hell, and then you have that balance there in the center, which is representative of weighing things. And in a sense, it could be weighing decisions, right? You'll notice that the woman is pregnant, so it could be representative of fertility as well as life-giving. There's a mirror on the wall here, which could represent self-knowledge. And then the jewels are symbols of earthly treasures. And all these issues must be weighed and decided in life. And so that is what the overall message of this painting is. The next theme in art we're going to talk about is invention and fantasy. So paintings or sculptures can bring an imaginary place to life visually. So artists use their imagination to create artwork. Sometimes they're not looking outward or, you know, inward. They're just using their imagination. This is the Garden of Earthly Delight by Hieronymus Bosch from 1505. And in it, we're seeing hundreds of figures cavorting in this kind of fantasy landscape, you know, this landscape that really wouldn't exist anywhere in the world. There are strange creatures. You can see here there's a strange creature holding up it looks like a bubble with human figures in it. All over the composition, you're going to see these types of human interactions with both plant forms and animal forms. And he drew upon his education for his sources such as folklore, literature, astrology, and religious writings. But really, you know, when you look at this painting, it's called the Garden of Earthly Delights, and you can kind of look at it and see, well, this is supposed to represent exactly what it says, the Garden of Earthly Delights, so things that are pleasurable in life. This is The Dream by Henry Rousseau from 1910. Henry Rousseau was a self-taught artist who really painted in this very detailed style, and he knew about what was going on in other art styles in 1910, you know, such as Picasso and other artists, but he really was indifferent to that and really just wanted to paint in his own style. Some of the elements that are typical in his work that we're seeing here is this monumental nude who's in this classical pose. You're seeing exotic animals that don't necessarily exist together in the real world, as well as this figure here who's playing an instrument. And those are all things from his imagination. They're done in meticulous detail, which is not really very realistic looking. You know, it becomes very static. And like I said, very detailed, whereas everything you're looking at, you can see, you know, down to the last leaf on the tree, which isn't really, you know, how our eye kind of interprets the world around us. This is Empty Dream by Mariko Mori from 1995. Here we're seeing another traditional pose, but in this case it's a mermaid, a woman in a mermaid costume. And she's kind of poking fun at that traditional pose that we saw, you know, in the Rousseau from the last image. Here it's set on a beach, and we're seeing just a ton of different bodies and people moving around. The mermaid is actually a self-portrait of the artist. And then we're also seeing standerbys kind of stare at the mermaid and take pictures. So kind of talking about conceit in a way. Art often has to do with nature, which is the next theme that we're going to be talking about. This is The Oxbow by Thomas Cole from 1836. He was a part of a group in the 19th century that wanted to capture America's natural beauty, so they went out on these long journeys and found these beautiful places to paint. This depicts the Connecticut River in Northampton, Massachusetts. The Loop is kind of a really a wonder of New England. In the painting, you can see half of the sky is taken up by the storm that kind of recedes, and then you're seeing the open sky on the other side. You can see boats down here that are tiny and kind of dot the river and are kind of being swamped by nature. So in a way, it's kind of this idea that man is insignificant in the face of nature, which is also something that we can see here in White Clouds over Zhao and Zhang by Jian from 1668. The name is telling us the place, but it's actually an imagined landscape. This type of landscape painting was a very honored subject in Chinese traditions. But the purpose was not to record the detail of the actual place. What it was more created for was to construct a place to wander through with the mind and the eye. So you would kind of start down here at the bottom and you'd work your way through the composition, and you'll notice that the foreground is separated from the middle ground by clouds, and then the middle ground is separated from the background with clouds. And that's kind of to give your eye a resting point throughout this image. Oftentimes in these types of paintings, there will be human figures, but they'll be very, very tiny, again, to represent that idea that humans are very insignificant in the face of nature. Here we have a stone and gravel garden, originally from 1480. And the artist here has a desire to create a landscape pleasing to the eye. And in this case, it's kind of halfway between sculpture and landscape architecture. It has been maintained continually since 1480. So the rocks are, raked every so often to create these lines around the stones. But it has changed over time as the moss has grown on the rocks and as the rocks have aged. This is considered to be a place of meditation, and really you're supposed to find your own meaning when you go there. So a much newer work of art, this is Spiral Jetty from Smithson from 1970. This is what we call an earthwork, in which the artist has taken the landscape, the earth, and actually has created an artwork out of it. This particular piece is in the Great Salt Lake. He was fascinated by the Salt Lake, and he really wanted a part in shaping the landscape. I'm going to show you a couple other images here. These are images that Smithson took himself, and you can see how it kind of changes, the view of the overall piece depending on your viewpoint. This too has changed over time. You can see in this last image here, you can see some salt growing, these salt crystals growing on the outside of the sculpture. The sculpture also has been submerged and then has reemerged over time. So the effects of nature become very important to these last two pieces. Our last theme that I want to talk about is called art and art. And what this basically means is that art can be its own subject. And so it can be about just giving visual pleasure. It can be about asking questions of what art is. And it can definitely be referring to, art history in general. This is A Sudden Gust of Wind by Jeff Wall from 1993. And he often set up paintings after older ones. And you can see the older one here from Hokusai from 1831. So over 100 years earlier. And the earlier piece, we're seeing basically an image of travelers who are caught in the wind. You can see papers flowing. You can see Mount Fuji in the background. That's giving you an idea of the location. And then in the newer piece by Wall, we're seeing that that same idea where we have these figures, we have papers blowing in the wind, the figures are all caught in the wind. The only thing that's really missing is that we don't see Mount Fuji in the background. And that's important because the original painting, the original piece was part of a 36 views of Mount Fuji. And it was part of a series of views into daily life in Japan that were all linked by Mount Fuji in the background. So it was kind of the deeper meaning of the piece. And that's lacking with the newer piece. In Summer Moon by Pat Steer, you're exploring visual delight. So it's just really about kind of your natural instinctual pleasure of looking. This particular piece is on a large scale and is meant to loom and envelop the viewer. Your attention should be drawn to the dark shape in the middle, which is made of thin paint thrown, splattered, and allowed to drip down the canvas. And really this embodies the energy of creation, the actions of the artist. This evokes a suddenness or surprise, kind of followed by echoes. So it's almost like a loud shout, and then you're hearing the echoes with these splatters around that central splash. The rest of the painting is very still. You almost get a sense of water running down a window. So, there's a lot, even though this is a non-objective painting, there's still a lot to look at, a lot to grasp, and a lot to feel by looking at it. So art can be just about giving visual pleasure, and it can also be about kind of artworks that have come before it. So that's the end of chapter 3, and I will talk to you on the next one.